Now they have an activity tonight at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. So junior high, senior high, come on back. They're going to have a movie this evening. Wow, that was just pretty good, wasn't it? That was enjoyable. Thank you. I'm going to continue to march through the book of Acts with just some select sermons that I wanted to preach, quite truthfully. Acts chapter 17 is where we're going to be today. Acts chapter 17. Paul's on the second missionary journey, and we covered that a little bit last week. And I've entitled the introduction, Tell Me More. Most of us have been exposed at some time or another to someone who has just really caught our attention in that ability to speak. We were so thrilled to listen to them and to let them speak to us on whatever it might be. They just seemed to have such a good grasp of their information, and they just had this wonderful excitement about making the presentation and delivering it. As I look back, it may be someone that was in your history, a family history. I can remember hearing Grandpa Sweeney or Grandma Pickle sit and talk about the family history and thrashers and all that would go with it. So they just kind of captivate you as you would listen to that. My uncle, who liked to do the family tree, he would tell stories, and he would load us up in the car and he'd haul us off to, used to be a stagecoach house here at this crossing, and I always found those type of things so very fascinating. Whenever I was growing up, I grew up in a community of about 40 people, maybe something like that, way out in the country, and all that was around us was farms. I've always laughed. Our little old community, we had a store, but we didn't even, you had to go a mile out to the hard road. Back where I come from, the hard road was the Route 45, and the blacktop was the Blue Mountain Road that went the other direction. So there was two ways in and out of our little village of 50. You had to go out to the hard road to get gas, but we had this little grocery store there. And the men of the community, there was an old church pew out front. And they'd sit there on that church pew and they'd spin stories and tell things of the past and of our little community. And Wednesday night was the best of all, because Wednesday night was the night that all the women went up to the little Methodist church on down the road, and all of those old loafers would sit there and lie to each other, and I'd sit there and soak that stuff up like it was all true. They could spin a story. Oh, it was good, and I enjoyed it so very, very much, and I look back and have such fond memories of that time. So now, all of us who have had those type of privileges, we have all, whether you like it or whether you don't like this situation, we have all been exposed to the gospel message. At some point in your life, you were exposed to it. Maybe it was Grandma Pickle. Maybe there was a grandma in your life and you weren't going to church, but she told you about church. Maybe it was the guy down the road or the sweet lady that lived next door. Whatever it might be, you heard a little bit about the gospel. Well, now in the day of Paul, they'd heard a whole lot about Judaism, and they'd heard a whole lot about false gods, but they didn't know much at all. All they were hearing was this slivers of information about this man from Galilee, this man that had walked on water, this man who had healed the sick and the lame had walked, the blind had seen. They've only heard slivers of it. Now what if you have never had anything but the slivers of the truth, and all of a sudden you hear that God is more than just that little bit that you've been hearing? That there's more to this God than a God of wrath. Many people still think God's a God of wrath. How many times do we hear people say, well, why does God let such bad things happen? Or why does He let that happen? Or why does He cause that to happen? And now someone wants to say, wait, we've got a God of love, a God who wants to tell us, who wants to forgive us, who wants to be there for us each step of the way. Now the apostle is introducing people to forgiveness and eternal life. That's when you hear, oh please, tell me more, tell me more. Acts chapter 17 verses 3 and 4, there you're going to find he's in Thessalonica. In Thessalonica it said, now he's been traveling, he's on the second missionary journey, he's come to Thessalonica. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and a few prominent women. But the Jews were jealous, it will go on to say. So here we are in Thessalonica, on that missionary journey. And in Thessalonica is going to be opposed. They are going to stand against the gospel. They are going to take a stand against the gospel. But in Thessalonica, there are those who are going to make a decision as he is telling them about the resurrection. As he is preaching to them and teaching them about that there is so much more to God than you've ever been exposed to. And let me tell you about Jesus and what Jesus has done for you. And then he starts telling them about the resurrection and starts sharing that information with them. And so it's powerful as he's telling them about that he had to raise from the dead in verse 3. Explaining and proving that Christ had to suffer and to raise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Christ, he said. And some were persuaded. Now, folks, the one thing that you want to know whenever you have a loved one that has passed, you want to know this in the end. You want to know that there's something else out there. We talk about heaven and we want to know that it's real. Now, all of these people of Thessalonica that are starting to make these decisions, a few Jews and Greeks and some God-fearing women that are listening to the Apostle Paul, they're learning about the resurrection. And how it's so much more that your loved one, through Christ, can live forever. Folks, that's the best news I can give you today. I could quit right there. That's the best news I can give you today. Is that your loved one can live forever through Jesus. What a powerful message. But remember, it said they were jealous of them, so now they're going to kind of get run out of Dodge, or out of Thessalonica in this case. Let's go over to Acts chapter 17, verse 11. In verse 11, now they've gone to this town of Berea, in Berea. Now, in Berea, here's what's going to take place. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Now, the Bereans, I like this, were more noble character than the Thessalonians. For many of you who are my age or older, do you remember the Sunday school class, the loyal Bereans? The loyal Bereans. This is where that comes from. The loyal Bereans. The Bereans were more noble than the men's class down the hall, the Thessalonians. There was a noble group, and they were anxious to hear the word. For they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. Now, not only are they listening to Paul, but now they're opening up the Jewish text, and they're seeing what is taking place. So the second outline there, the first one is Thessalonica, the second one's Berea. The Berea, they were more willing to learn. They were anxious to learn, and they couldn't help but want to learn more. So there's believers in both places. But that gospel is being spread. So they are searching the scriptures daily to see what they can find. Whenever you first become a Christian, you were more like the Bereans, more loyal, more noble, and you're wanting to know more. And you may have tried to study on your own, or you may have bought a devotional, or you may have got a magazine, subscribed to a magazine or whatever, or you may have just come to Bible study or talked to the preacher or talked to that lady or that man who had led you to the Lord because you're wanting to know more. You're wanting to know more. Folks, I know whenever I become a Christian, I was late into my high school year, my senior year. There was just 10 days before my graduation, and all of a sudden I found out that learning was going to be exciting. That stuff I learned in high school probably wasn't my best moments, all right? In fact, I probably did some things that just weren't really good moments at all in high school. And some of those teachers, I left a lasting impression, I'm confident. So if any of them ever listen to me on the tape here, I am sorry. But about 10 days before graduation, I got this desire to learn more. I couldn't wait to hear more about this Jesus that I'd been introduced to. That was like the loyal Bereans, the more noble Bereans. But now there's that unsavory group down there in Thessalonica that heard that Paul was having success up in Berea, so boom, off they go, and they're going to cause him more trouble even up there. Myron, good to see you come in. I'm glad you're here. It's going to cause you more trouble. So off they go to be able to do that. Now there was believers in both places, but folks, here in your next outline slot, there will always be opposition when the gospel is being preached. Whenever the church is doing good things, there's always going to be those that are trying to knock it down. It's no different today. It was true in the apostles' day, it was true in Jesus' day, and it's true today. There are going to be those who are going to try to destroy just a little common church like us because they say, oh, why do you need a crutch to lean upon? And folks, Jesus is not my crutch. I want you to know that. He's my wheelchair. He's carrying me. Amen. There's no crutch involved in it. I don't need to lean on Him. He needs to carry me because I can mess up on my own. And He sees that I have some guidance. There's always going to be those who are opposed. Why? I always wondered, why are they opposed? Well, first of all, because I've come to the conclusion in my own mind that anyone that is opposed to the church, it's because they're under conviction and don't want to do anything about it. Some of us have been there in our days, that we've been opposed to what they're doing there. Why? Because it's got a conviction upon my heart that I know God wanted me to change and I didn't do it. And that's the second one, is change. That the church brings change in people. Now, that can work two ways. The reason people are opposed to the church, let's say that you have just felt like your marriage was just going along really well. Things were just pretty good. You and your wife were doing okay. And all of a sudden, she accepts the Lord. And now she's not wanting to do those other things that you used to do. She no longer wants to go out and party, and she no longer wants to do this or that because she's a little more focused about what God might have you do in your life. Or it can work the other way. Maybe it's the guy that's been converted and it's you evil women that have tried to knock him down. So however that is, you take that for whatever that's worth. So whichever one of us is in trouble here, one way or the other, we don't want to see that change come to our house. Why? Because everything was just right. Well, folks, it wasn't just right. You were headed on a road to disaster. And the church has brought change into your home. Now, the church also brings a challenge into your home. A challenge into your home. It challenges us to live and be better people. There's conviction, there's change, and there's challenge. It challenges us to do better. Okay, now that's the first part of the sermon there in leading into the city of Athens, Acts chapter 17. Now this is still the second missionary journey in Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 18. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Get that, it's full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicureans and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. About Jesus and the resurrection. Athens was a great cultural center of the day. It was a university town. It was famous for its structures, Parthenon, other great buildings. You can look them up there, and the Acropolis, many things. All were there. You can look all those up and you can see what Athens was all about, and it's great city that was there. But it was a city full of idols, the scripture said. The city was filled with idols. Now there were some normal people there, and there were some people that were just totally full of themselves. You ever met anyone like that? There's some people that are just totally full of themselves. Well, they were all in Athens. It was a university town, so you can expect a little bit of everything. The Epicureans, so we hear that, so who are they? Well, they believe that everything happened by chance, that nothing else happened. It just all happened by chance. They believe that once you die, it's all over, that's the end, nothing to worry about. So live your life in a manner that is satisfactory to you. Now the Stoics, they believe that everything is a god. That plant's a god, that's a god, that's a god. And everything that happened, good or bad, was because of one of the gods, and that we must accept it. That there is no change, we just have to accept. Now here comes Paul preaching this message, and those are very brief summaries of who they are. Paul comes sharing the message, He's in the synagogue, he's in the marketplace, and now there's these philosophers. They're all philosophers. That's the love of wisdom. And it means that they're always searching for more and more wisdom. They're wanting to impress you with what they know and all that they know. Now, all of that being said, that's what's taking place in Athens. So in Athens, we've got all these wonderful structures, and Paul now is going to be invited. Well, let me not get ahead of myself. We're going to look at his sermon here. He's going to be invited to Mars Hill. All right? He's going to be invited to this place to be able to share with them. They brought him to the Areopagus. And the Areopagus at Mars Hill, it's where all of those who thought they were really knowledgeable would gather and dispute and argue and share new ideas and things in this order. Now, Paul is going to bring a message, and that's what this whole message is about today, is this message. Because this gives you something to work with every time you talk to someone that doesn't know God or someone who is not living for God. The very first thing is Acts chapter 17, verses 22 and 23. Then Paul stood in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." Now, if you got the King James, if anyone got King James besides Don? I knew Don's hand to go up. He remembers it. So he's got the King James, and it says, "I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious." So Don, you can find that there in verse 22. It said, "I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I was walking around looking carefully at your objects of worship," now get this, as I'm looking at your objects of worship, he's talking about the idols, the statues that are throughout the city. He said, "I even found an altar, for as I walked around looking, I even found an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" To an unknown God. Now what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. In other words, an introduction to the unknown God. Now remember, this group is really full of themselves, folks. They place themselves as being wiser than the wise. They think that they are just very smart, and they are smart people. I don't want to take that away from them. But Paul was very knowledgeable about God. More so than I believe anyone, and perhaps anyone else who's ever walked the earth besides Jesus. And he knows this unknown God. They didn't know him because they had an object of worship to an unknown God. So they're not quite as smart as they think they are. And he's going to introduce them. I want all of you to take just a moment and think about someone in your life that you need to introduce to God. Now, they may think they know God, but you can tell that God is unknown to them, that they really don't know him. See, folks, I've been sharing this with you now for 2 or 3 weeks. A lot of people know about God, and they know that there's a God, but they don't know God. They don't know God. They know what they've been told. They know what little they've read, but they don't know him. Now, these philosophers had a lot of knowledge about gods. Small G-O-D-S. Gods. Had a lot of knowledge about them. And what they didn't know, they'd make up and move on. They had a lot of knowledge about them. But they didn't know the true and the living God. So I think our very first thing that we have to see from what the apostle is going to preach on Mars Hill is an introduction. So how do you introduce people to this God? It's hard to just come up and say, "Here, let me introduce you to Jesus." Even though I have personally done that. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. It depends on how much they're looking. One of my favorite phrases is, "Let me tell you about my Jesus." Many of you will remember that from whenever I was younger. And that's one of my favorite. Let me tell you about my Jesus. And I'd want to share with them about what Jesus can do. But I've found today that one of my best ways to introduce them to God is whenever And this is just the way it is. Sometimes bad things happen to us. Now, it can be the death of a loved one. It can be a collapse of your finances. It can be a repossession of your home or your car or whatever. It may be anything. But it's a good opportunity for me to say, you know, God still really loves you. And I'd like to tell you about Him. I'd like to share with you. And I know that you probably don't want to hear it right now. So I can either tell you now, or here's my card, you can call me later. Or give me your card and I'll call you. We have to help them to know the unknown. To know the unknown. And how do we do that? We each have to find our own little way to do that. Because folks, once we introduce them, we are going to change their world. We're going to change their world. I'm not talking about changing their lives only. I'm talking about changing their entire world. Because that's what we do when we introduce them to Jesus. So the very first thing the apostle did, he said, let me introduce you to this unknown God. He said, as I was passing by, I saw altars to this God and that God, that God. He said, and I even found one that said to an unknown God, he said, I want to introduce you. I want to introduce you. I want to tell you about this unknown God. I want you to see how powerful He truly is. Now, the next thing you're going to find is, let's drop down to verse 24 and following. He is going to inform them about the unknown God. First of all, He's going to introduce them. Now He's going to inform them. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And He is not served by human hands as if He needed anything, because He Himself gives all men life and breath and everything in it. From one man He made every nation, and you can go on. And He's informing them. Now, the part that's really going to strike these guys is He is the creator of everything. He is the creator of everything. Well, now wait, they've got their philosophy that everything is a God in itself. And He said, no, He created it all. He's going to inform them of what God is and what God does and how awesome He truly is and how powerful He truly is. He said, from one man, it was all created. Now, He's just got through telling those Stoics and Epicureans, He said, you know, you really all come from the same place, Adam. And those Jews and those Greeks, they all come from the same place, Adam. And He's starting to challenge them in ways that they've never been challenged. He's starting to show them things that they didn't understand. God did this so that man would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being. He said, even some of your own poets have said that we are His offsprings. Now He's saying, now you are aware of God because you were created by Him. By Him. I want each of you now to go back to that person that you had in mind, the one that you wanted to introduce. What do you need to inform them about? What's going on in their life that you need to tell them? Let me tell you about my Jesus. Let me tell you what He can do for you. Maybe you need to share with them how much He's really loved you, that He died on a cross for you, that you're feeling very unloved right now. I think we're living in a time whenever people feel unloved and unwanted. I see it daily, and I know that you do as well, that we see homes that have broken down. We see kids that need loving. I'm so glad that we make little efforts like this to pay attention to our kids. I'm glad that the program's going on tonight for the older kids. You know, there's a lot of kids that just feel unloved. I hear conversations. I was walking this week, and as I walked by the school, there's a group of boys and a group of girls, and I heard things I should have never heard. And the biggest one was this big. It's terrible. I think we're living in very tough times. So I want each of you to think about what you want to inform them about this person that you've got in mind. Do you want to tell them how much God loves them? Do you want to tell them how, I know you're walking through a valley right now, but God says you're not going to walk alone? Do you want to tell them about, folks, life is no accident, that our Creator has given to us life and breath. Now, some of the paths that we've taken we shouldn't have, but you know the best thing about being on the wrong path? It'll lead back to the right path if you let it. Most of us at some time or another have been on the wrong path. And whenever you're on the wrong path and you realize it, I remember many, many years ago I took a youth group on a hiking trip. We used to love to hike, and Deb and I'd load up the old Chevelle and off we'd go, and we'd have kids running out the ears, more kids than the car was supposed to haul. And we were on this hiking trip, an all-day hiking trip. So I decided to follow the creek. We were going down through a national forest and we followed the creek. Creek took a split. We ended up somewhere where I didn't know, and whenever we got back to the split, I went the wrong direction. Now I've got about a dozen junior high, senior high kids, and I'm thinking I'm never going to get them out of this national forest. I was really starting to worry about it. And then little did I realize, pretty soon it kind of led back around and we were on the right path again. Whoo, mercy, I took a deep breath. I was sure relieved. Now there was two of them I should have left out there, quite truthfully. But the rest of them I took home with us. Now you're wondering if that was one of yours, aren't you? Yeah, there's a couple of them should have been left, but the rest of them deserved to go home. So the point being, I was so relieved to get back on that right path. Now I want each of you to realize that if you're on the wrong path right now, and in a crowd this size, we've got some who are on the wrong path. It goes back into the right path. But you've got to be able to make the right turns. You've got to be able to want to find, yea, though I walk through the valley. You got to be able to find that He's going to walk with you. So the first thing, he said, is introduce them. The second thing is to inform them. The third thing is accountability. Chapter 17, verses 29 and 31. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver. Now, wait a second, gold, silver, or stone, what do you think these idols are made of here in Athens? He said, you shouldn't think that they're like that. And images made by man's design and skills. Now, all of them were made by man's design and skills. And he's just getting through and saying, I've passed by all of these altars and none of them are right. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance. He just called all these smart people ignorant. He said, God overlooked this ignorance. But now He commands all people everywhere to repent. And He has set a day when He will judge the world with justice by man He has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising Him from the dead. Wait a second. They also don't believe that there's anything after death. And he just got through saying that, one, there's going to be judgment. Two, it's going to be by the guy that God has raised from the dead. Wow. Now, he just got through saying there's going to be some accountability. Romans chapter 14, verse 12, if you just want to write that in the outline there in your bulletin, everyone's going to give an account. Everyone will have to give an account of themselves, Romans 14:12 says. So now, there's two accounts to be given. One, that person that we're thinking about, folks, someday they're going to have to give an account of their life. And two, you. If you've missed the opportunity of telling that person, you're going to have to someday give an account. That's kind of scary to me. So, if I meet a stranger, I want to know if they know Jesus, because I don't want to be held accountable for someone not knowing. I want to encourage you. That accountability is about our lives. Now the fourth thing that's going to take place is in verse 34. In verse 34, it's going to say this. A few men become followers of Paul and believe. Now that's of those smart guys. Also a woman and a number of others. choices. You can start up in verse 32 and go down. And it says, some will choose to hear more, and some will sneer and not want to hear anymore. They don't want to know what's going on. I don't want to change my beliefs. Now, folks, it's no different today. You're going to find some people that you are going to interest. You may not even entice them, but you're going to prick their interest. What did that person find? That's what they should say about you. What did Mike find that I've missed? What did you find that your friends have missed? Make them look at you in a new way. That there's something different about that person. Because there were some who desired to hear more, and there was others who would just sneer. It's no different today. Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 14 says that there's a wide and a narrow way. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. You're going to talk to more people that don't want to know what you got than you do ones who want to know what you got. I just want to give you a heads up. That's the way it's going to work. But folks, talk to them. Follow Paul's example here. Use this brief little outline. Introduce them. Inform them of what your God is able to do. Tell them that there's going to be an accounting. And the choice is theirs. Choices. So the message hasn't changed. Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus is the same yesterday and today and forever. The message hasn't changed. Jesus didn't change. People haven't changed. It's just as difficult today as it was then, and it's just as rewarding today as it was then for those who find a pearl of great price. I want all of you now to take just one more journey with me. I want your own journey, your life. I would be shocked if anyone would tell me that it hasn't been worth it to have Jesus in your life. I would be shocked by you. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if some of you would say, I've walked with him a ways and I've been away from him a ways, and I've walked with him a ways and I've been away from him a ways. I wouldn't be shocked at that. I wouldn't be shocked at someone saying, you know, I walked with him when I was young and I come back the other day. That wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me to have someone say, I've just started walking with him. I haven't walked with him long, but I'm glad I'm here. But it would shock me if anyone would say, I didn't ever want to know him. We are richer by knowing him, even when we don't walk with him. Because when I'm not walking with him, folks, he doesn't quit convicting me. Does he you? Now, if you've been away for a while, I would like for you to stand up and say, it was Mike's phone call that got me back. Yeah, right. You know what really got you back? Was that message right here on your heart. That Jesus said, come home. Come home. Will you all please stand as we have our invitation? If there's decisions to be made, it's time to step out, come down the aisle. All things are ready. Come on down. I did go call on Bud. I did go call on you and got you here, but it was the Lord that convicted you. All right, thank you.